must go has become the daily Lord's Prayer for the Gen Z population in Kenya. This prayer is being accompanied by weekly protests that have rocked Nairobi and other major towns and cities in Kenya since last month. Hustler William Ruto, Africa's most troubled president of 2024, has compromised a lot in attempts to bring the protest to an end and probably cling to power till the end of his 5-year term. His latest attempt was a direct Wednesday 17th order by the police, banning all protest in Nairobi city, claiming criminals had infiltrated the peaceful protest. But Kenya is a country with a democratic setup, even though the leaders may not be democratic. Just one day after police issuing the order, a court in Nairobi ruled the order illegal and granted the Gen Z the right to continue with the protest. The big question now, therefore, becomes what next for President Hustler William Ruto? But before we try to figure out this question, let's try to refresh our minds with how it all started up to where it's now. The Hustler's problems begun way during his campaign period. Like most of other African politicians who have made lying to the electorate part of elective politics, Ruto promised the young people of Kenya a new heaven on earth, promising to rid the country of corruption and forging a better future for the young populations. Little did he know Kenyans are not adamant citizens who can be lied to. His promises would later haunt him. In June, the Hustler presented to Parliament a finance bill that proposed sharp tax increases for some of the most essential commodities like bread and sanitary towels. The bill also proposed tax increases on essential cancer drugs and computers. The Hustler claimed the tax increases were meant to cover the country's debt that currently stands at $68 billion. The young people of Kenya, termed Gen Z, rejected the financial amendments, citing enormous corruption and lavish spending by the Hustler. The Gen Z took to the streets in peaceful protests until they were able to occupy Parliament building. Being a calculative businessman who rose through the ranks from hawking eggs on the streets to head of state, the Hustler quickly dropped the finance bill, hoping for a trade-off.
I am very proud of our young people. They have stepped forward tribeless. They have stepped forward peaceful. And I want to tell them we are going to engage them.
But this could not save him. Because following the occupation of Parliament by the Gen Z, a number of young people were gunned down, while others were later abducted by plain-clothed operatives. This angered the Gen Z the more. They changed course and demanded that the Hustler President Ruto, often known as Zakayo among the Gen Z, must go. They also demanded that Zakayo must dismiss his entire cabinet and engage with the young people on a negotiating platform. The other thing that even angered the Gen Z more were unconfirmed reports on social media that Zakayo the Hustler was getting advice from his Ugandan counterpart, General Untouchable, Unadvisable Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, whom Ugandans have been stuck with for the past 38 years. In fact, this was the major reason the Gen Z set Uganda House in Nairobi ablaze. Ugandan authorities have never commented on this allegation, but an expert on East African politics who spoke to this channel on condition of anonymity told this channel that indeed, there were some similarities between the way the protesters were gunned down and abducted in Nairobi and how Ugandan authorities always dealt with street protests and opposition politicians. Desperate to hold on to power, the Hustler claimed the peaceful protests of the Gen Z were infiltrated by criminal elements, thus justifying the use of live ammunition. This statement is commonly used in Uganda and has been used to deny opposition parties any space to conduct protests against the regime in Kampala. Left with no options, the Hustler once again bowed to the Gen Z pressure and responded by firing almost all his cabinet and engaged with the protesters on social media to forge the way forward for Kenya.
I have today decided to dismiss with immediate effect all the cabinet secretaries and attorney general of the Republic of Kenya, of the Cabinet of Kenya.
His police chief resigned apparently because of excessive use of force during the protests that resulted to a number of deaths. However, many sources claim the Inspector General of Police was simply fired due to his failure to deal with the protest. Ruto accepted the police chief's resignation and appointed his deputy as a replacement. He thought this would quench the thirst of the Gen Z. Instead, they said, "Thank you. You are on course. But one more thing. You must join your cabinet in quitting government."
Ruto must go. Tunasema wote, tunamaanisha, tunasema ni wote. Hizi ni saizi. And what we are fighting for is for a fair Kenya. What we are fighting for is a Kenya without corruption. What we are fighting for is a Kenya of peace. What we are fighting for is a Kenya of equal opportunity. Is a meritocracy. It's a Kenya which unaweza pata ID in siku moja. Unaweza pata passport in 10 or 30 days. Unaweza pata good conduct bure. Unaweza pata kazi, unaweza apply kwa online services za serikali na upate kazi. Unaweza kula, mtoto anaweza enda shule apate lunch.
At this point, the hustler begun to run out of options. He begun to lay accusations against American organizations for funding the protests. Well, we cannot deny, we know Western powers have destabilized many African countries in the name of democracy, freedom, and human rights. But that could not be easily believed by many Kenyans, given the fact that prior to the protests, Zakayo had just returned from a lavish trip from the USA, visiting America's President Joe Biden. Left alone without any more lies, Ruto found himself hanging on to power by a slight piece of hair. His newly appointed police chief could be his only hope. Well, a drowning man will always try all options available, including riding on a tilapia. Indeed, this was what happened. The police chief on Wednesday announced the banning of all protests in Nairobi until further notice, claiming they had no leadership that made it hard to secure the city in the wake of such protests. To the hustler, this was probably the best relief he could get from a perfect police chief trying to pay back his appointing authority. Well, again, this statement is synonymous with Uganda police, where the police have always denied opposition activities within Kampala Business Center, claiming criminals were taking advantage of such activities to loot and wreak havoc in Kampala City. But Kenya is not Uganda. The hustler's relief was short-lived, as court one day, after the ban ruled, the Gen Z were free to continue with their protest as court would listen to an appeal by government for such a ban. At this point, what else can the hustler do? Because Tuesday is coming and the Gen Z will be back on the streets of Nairobi demanding for their future by all means available to them, and chanting their daily prayer. Ruto must go. Leave us a comment giving some advice to the hustler on what he could do to save his seat. Remember to share this video, like it, hit the notification bell, and subscribe so that you get notified when we release videos like this. Thanks for watching.